And here we go. Okay, so this is our second Thinking Tuesday session for the month of February, and it is titled American Jewish Alphabet Soup. Um, the alphabet is the English alphabet. We're not worrying about Israeli organizations, so we don't have to worry about the Hebrew alphabet. Um, and so we'll kind of do initially a rough taxonomy, like what kinds of organizations are there, and then move through the taxonomy that you can already see kind of on the screen that I've put together. And it's rough as these things go. There are organizations that span more than one category. So there are the Jewish movement organizations, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Humanistic, etc. Jewish community and funders, right? There's kind of a whole group of um, organizations that primarily raise money and distribute those funds out for use at the local or international level. Israel-Palestine related organizations, organizations that do actual work in the field for social change, um, organizations that are largely or primarily engaged in politics or policy making in some way. So these are think tanks, but there are also um, the Jewish associations related to major political parties and things like that. And then education and culture, which covers a really broad range of things, but you'll actually see that there's these two separate ecosystems of education in the Jewish world in the US. One is religious and one is also kind of religious, but not. Um, and there's some overlap, but there's also a significant degree of difference in what those organizations look like and do. So our rough taxonomy is basically these kinds of this six that I've put together, and you could do a lot of subdividing among them. But in general, there are the movements, which are what most typical Jews tend to know best because they're connected to synagogues. And that's how most people still kind of engage with Jewish life in organizational ways. And then there are the funders, which are usually national level groups that kind of deploy monetary resources, Zionist and not so Zionist groups on the Israel Palestine end of things, social change groups, politics. This doesn't have to be Zionist, non-Zionist, anti-Zionist, right? There are lots of Jewish groups that are engaged in political issues. And then culture and education is kind of a catch-all. But there are also some oddball kinds of organizations that don't necessarily fit with any of these, but are still important because they provide access or they provide services in some way that still kind of stand outside of any of these. So chaplaincy organizations are an example of this. Um, and there are other ways that you can cut that cake. Um, and nothing will be exhaustive, right? You can just keep going down a list and look at local organizations and things like that, but the ones that most often show up in the news or that you're most likely to access information from are the ones that I wanted to make sure kind of put up in front of you so that you got a chance to see, oh, that's what that is versus this other thing. Um, and it helps to know that there's a history behind this, um, which is the kahila. So the word kahila just means community. So kahila chadasha, which we collaborate with, just means new community. If you look at the old world, starting from about 1700 onward, the kahila is an actual institution that does this role of standing as a single community organizational resource, almost like a government. Um, so it, on the one hand, served Jews in whatever region it was in. On the other hand, it served as the interface between Jews and the government of the country that they were in or the government of the region that they were in. And it also served as the interface between Jews and other religious groups. So when the local Catholic Church wanted to deal with Jews in some way, they would come to the Kahila. When the local Protestants wanted to deal with Jews in some way, they would come to the Kahila. There was a Kahila in the Ottoman Empire, so the Ottoman government would come to the Kahila in a particular place and say, we need taxes. It's your job to collect the taxes. Go get them, bring them back to us. Um, and so that the Kahila existed because it was given official status by these non-Jewish governments where Jews found themselves living. When Jews came to the US, that's just not how the United States worked. It didn't have official relationships with any religious groups. Even with the kind of Christian dominionism that was around even, in the late 1800s, the US government was not interested in dealing with Jews writ large, just like it really wasn't interested in dealing with Catholics writ large or Lutherans writ large. And so when Jews came, there were attempts to reconstruct kahilas in places. New York tried, but they didn't really take. And so what we have today in the US is something that much more reflects the way the US interacted with religious groups, which was kind of do what you're going to do. And so we have a whole bunch of complex organizations and a big ecosystem of things, just like kind of everybody else does, rather than the kahila. There are in some smaller areas things that are a little bit like kahilas. So if you were to go to the five towns in New York, which is a concentration of a concentrated area where there are a lot of ultra Orthodox Jews. There are things that are more like this that are kind of quasi self-governing in some ways, but it's not anything like the Kahila in Eastern Europe or in the Ottoman Empire or even in Germany or France, where that was a body that would collect taxes and forward them to the government from the Jewish population, but would also collect money to redistribute to support schools and charities and do all of the things that went into organizing Jewish community as kind of this quasi government. We don't have that. The Jewish federations don't do that, right? They're fundraising things, but they don't run the Jewish world in the same way. So we'll look first at Jewish movements. So movement is used rather than denomination. And that's because not all of the movements are denominations. So reform, conservative, humanistic to the extent that people are formally affiliated with humanistic Judaism are more like denominations, like Lutherans and whatever else. There are rabbinical training schools and there are congregational associations and there is a publishing arm and there's a clergy arm and there are camps and all of that kind of thing. Some are more like loose confederations, and so we're really talking about ideas or reactions to ideas. So we tend to talk about Orthodox Jews as Orthodox or ultra Orthodox. And particularly in the ultra Orthodox world, there's not a lot of unity. They're not, there are lots and lots and lots of little yeshivas. Your credentials as a rabbi in those communities are based entirely, at least at first, upon who you trained with, who ordained you, like which rabbi, not which college you went to. And so most secular groups outside of humanistic Judaism kind of function this way too. And then Reconstructionism and renewal are sort of a blend. Um, they're each a slightly different blend. So we'll kind of talk about how each of them work separately. Um, a firmed up movement can kind of loosely be defined as a triad of some kind of umbrella organization for congregations or communities, a training program for clergy, and a clergy association. I mean, that basically those are the three things that you need. Um, there are rabbinical schools that are not connected to movements or to clergy associations at all, and actually serve multiple movements and independent congregations too. But so they don't really belong to movements. They're pluralistic or whatever else, but a movement's going to tend to have these three things in one way, shape, or form or another. So if we look at kind of the six movements in US Jewish life, there's Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, but there are these Orthodox is actually three, maybe four overlapping ecosystems. Reconstructionist Judaism, secular and humanistic, and there's a slash in there because most of the formal pieces of what was the secular Jewish world and organized communities have really kind of petered out. And then renewal. So reform is organized under the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism. And underneath the URJ are things like the RAC, the Religious Action Center, which we'll talk about later, or camps. So there are 13 or 14 reform summer camps across the US. There are a few that are kind of local to this area. There's one in Indiana, there's one in California. So there's a number of these kinds of summer camps. CCAR is the Central Conference of American Rabbis, so that's the clergy association. HUCJIR is the human, huh, is the Hebrew Union College dash Jewish Institute of Religion. It is called that because Hebrew Union College was founded in Cincinnati. Jewish Institute for Religion was founded in New York. They were both reform institutions. They were merged, and you got HUCJIR as the result. NIFTY is the National Federation of Temple Youth. So that's the national level youth group program and all of the subordinate organizations. And there is a very small network of Reform day schools. I think there's like 15 or 16 of them. So they really, the reform movement really only started to embrace the idea of day schools at all in the mid 80s. So they started very far behind everyone else in this day school thing. Um, Conservative Judaism is USCJ, which has started calling itself USCJ and doesn't unpack the acronym anymore. But the acronym is the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. And that includes their Ramah camps. Um, all of the all of the conservative movement camps are called Ramah, whatever, Ramah Poconos, Ramah Berkshires, Ramah North, Ramah South. There's a number of them. The RA is the Rabbinical Assembly, so that's the Rabbinical Association. There's also a CA, the Cantors Association. The conservative movement was actually the first movement to, they don't use the word ordain, they use the word investiture. So they were the first to grant investiture to cantors. And so they have a cantors assembly. JTSA is the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. It's in New York, just kind of on the border between Upper Manhattan and the uh, lower reaches of Harlem, um, right near Columbia University. Um, that's long been the kind of flagship rabbinical school. There is also a school in California in Los Angeles called the American Jewish University. Used to be called University of Judaism. And it has a second conservative rabbinical school in it called the Ziegler School. And Ziegler has started to provide almost as many rabbis as Jewish Theological Seminary has. JTS has been around since the 1880s. Ziegler's been around since the mid 1990s. USY is United Synagogue Youth, so that's the youth group programming. And then there is a established and somewhat robust network of conservative Jewish day schools called the Solomon Schechter schools. There are Solomon Schechter schools in many, many cities around the country. They embraced that early. Solomon Schechter is not the founder of conservative Judaism, but really is the person that energized conservative Judaism in the United States and turned it into something of an actual movement. He was a scholar from Cambridge who's actually British, but he really kind of energized conservative Judaism to be something more than this languishing school in New York, which is really what it was into the early 1900s. Orthodox Judaism, I said there's three broad but somewhat overlapping ecosystems. There might actually be four of those ecosystems. So modern or neo-Orthodoxy is mainstream Orthodox. Includes the Orthodox Union, which sort of is a combination of individual members and congregations, and a piece of it that supervises kashrut in large industrial food locations and things like that. Yeshiva University and RIETS. RIETS is the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. It's the actual yeshiva for rabbis inside of Yeshiva University, right? Yeshiva University is a kind of quasi-secular university, has a med school, has a law school. The med school and law school have lots of non-Jewish students. They have a school of social work and an undergraduate college and a graduate college. Um, Isaac Elchanan Seminary is the rabbinical school. And NCSY, NCSY, the National Conference for Synagogue Youth, so that's the youth group network. Agudath Israel is the umbrella organization that serves a large number of ultra-Orthodox Jews. So they are politically very conservative, religiously very conservative, not necessarily Hasidic, but ultra Orthodox, right? There's a really wide range of people that are ultra Orthodox. Um, there are Hasidic sects, so the ones most people end up knowing are Chabad Lubavitch and maybe Satmar, but there are many, many others as well. And then there are dozens of independent yeshivas, right? These in loose networks. So there are tons of these little places where people study, and charity kind of keeps these places afloat. And people are ordained as rabbis in these sort of private ceremonies. It's not a big commencement situation like you would find at Jewish Theological Seminary or Hebrew Union College or one of these places. They are generally not college level institutions of study. They're not interested in secular degrees. And there are lots and lots and lots of different ways of being ordained in the Orthodox world. So there's sort of, there are all of these different, there are all of these different approaches to teaching Jewish law. And there are rabbis who have like three or four different ordinations because they do multiple things. Um, Reconstructionist Judaism is the Reconstructionist movement now calls its umbrella organization Reconstructing Judaism rather than Reconstructionist, with the idea being that Reconstruction is ongoing. Just as Reform Judaism calls itself Reform because the reform is ongoing. You will hear people say, "Oh, I grew up Reformed," meaning they grew up in a Reform synagogue, which makes Reform rabbis go absolutely nuts because we're not done yet. Um, Reconstructionist includes the RRA, which is the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. That's the clergy association. And Camp Havaya, which is their summer camp. They don't have a day school network. They don't really have an organized youth group thing at a national level necessarily. And then RRC is Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, which
I,
is up in
you,
suburban Philadelphia.
you forgot. But
Um,
Total? Yeah. I remember it's pretty easy. All right.
Um, the secular and humanistic world has a laundry list of things. Some of them are functional and some of them are not. Um, Machar is affiliated with SHJ, the Society for Humanistic Judaism. The AHR, the Association for Humanistic Rabbis, is the Clergy Association. IISHJ, the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, is the rabbinical school. There is an offshoot of SHJ called Jews for a Secular Democracy, which is an organizing arm. There was something called the International Federation for Secular and Humanistic Jews that tried to coordinate um, secular and humanistic Jews around the world. It's been defunct for a while. Most of its funds and historical materials live with um, the Institute now. Um, Workers' Circle started as a Jewish labor organizing group and has kind of grown to do a number of different political advocacy things, but also a lot of cultural education. So you can go online and learn Yiddish with the Worker Circle, and they take it seriously. They use textbooks and everything. It's not a nostalgia trip or any of that kind of thing. Like you really can learn Yiddish with the Worker Circle. Um, CSJO, as of now, is defunct and is still sort of redefining itself. Maybe um, its most recent incarnation, it was the Cultural and Secular Jewish Organization. It's been called a number of different things over the years. There were a few local communities that were affiliated with it, um, but it used to be a really, really, really active and viable organization and sort of just dwindled over time. Camp Kinderring and Camp Kinderland are actually cultural, secular Jewish camps for kids. Um, they did not start broadly in that way. Kinder Ring was associated with the Workers' Circle. Worker Circle in Yiddish was Arbeiter Ring. So Camp Kinder Ring was associated with the Worker Circle. Um, in its original guise, the Worker Circle was socialist. So Camp Kinder Ring was socialist. Camp Kinderland was actually connected to the Jewish section of the Communist Party of the United States of America back in the early 1900s and mid 1900s. And so Kinderland was, at least at first, a camp for the children of Jewish communists in the US. And Kinderland and Kinderring at one point were on opposite sides of a lake in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and had a not very friendly rivalry because the folks from Kinderland understood that some of the folks from Kinderring had maybe sold out people to the McCarthy Commission and things like that. And so there was a lot of that divisiveness that happens on the left that happened between Kinderring and Kinderland. And there are a lot of unaffiliated secular Jewish communities too. There's, for example, Ann Arbor, Michigan, there is a humanistic Jewish congregation up there that talks about Sherwin Wine and talks about humanistic Judaism and has never been affiliated with the Society for Humanistic Judaism, which is 30 minutes to the east. Beth Chai here in the DC area is unaffiliated, but has made that decision intentionally, right? Not to be affiliated with the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and we are. Jewish Renewal, which explaining it is hard to explain other than to say it's a strange combination of Jewish mysticism, New Age religion, and not expecting people to follow Jewish law. Um, is organized under an organization called Aleph. all in capitals. It's important you know it's all in capitals because there's another Aleph that's not all in capitals and it's something very different. Aleph, all in capitals, is sort of the national organization. The Aleph ordination program actually runs ordination programs for rabbis, cantors, something that at least recently was called something like para-rabbinical pastors, or rabbinical pastors. It's a quasi, not quite rabbi, not a rabbi. It's an odd sort of lay leadership, but not lay leadership category. And Ohala is the clergy association. So rabbis and cantors belong to Ohala, and Ohala is unusual along with the Association for Humanistic Rabbis in that they aren't super concerned about you having ordination from an accredited rabbinical school. So rabbinical programs like Jewish Theological Seminary, Hebrew Union College, are accredited with with an accrediting agency and are able to take U.S. Department of Education funds and things like that. Their Aleph ordination program is not. SHJ, the institute, is not. And both Renewal and the Association for Humanistic Rabbis don't require that kind of ordination in order to be a member. There's lots of independent and unaffiliated synagogues. Some began this way intentionally. Kehila Chadashah, for example, we cooperate with all the time, not only began unaffiliated, they have a plank in their bylaws that says they will not be affiliated with any big national movement. So even though they really are kind of in some ways founded in Jewish renewal, they're not connected to Jewish renewal. There are some synagogues that form this way because of cultural origins. A lot of Sephardic synagogues just exist. They hire rabbis however they can. Sometimes they look more orthodox, sometimes they look more conservative or more liberal or whatever. Um, there are some national level Sephardic organizations, but it's not Sephardic Judaism is a movement in the same way. And a lot of synagogues have over time intentionally disaffiliated. So you will find things like a synagogue is a conservative synagogue, loses its rabbi, and there's a member of the congregation who they really respect as a leader, and they would like that person to be their rabbi, and that person goes and gets rabbinical ordination in some way that is not involved going to Jewish Theological Seminary or to Ziegler. And the conservative movement says, no, you can't be a conservative synagogue if you have a rabbi from outside our movement. And they say, fine, then we won't be a member of the movement anymore. That is not uncommon. Orthodox Judaism isn't lashed together as a denomination. So, yes, the Isaac Elkanan Seminary at Yeshiva University exists and ordains rabbis, but most ultra-Orthodox synagogues would not hire one of their rabbis. They just wouldn't. And in any event, ultra-Orthodox synagogues don't center on rabbis. That's not how that world functions. The Reconstructionist Movement School, RRC, had somewhat close ties to conservative Judaism. There was a period of time when Mordechai Kaplan, who founded Reconstructionist Judaism, was still doing conservative Judaism. He was a professor at Jewish Theological Seminary for decades and decades. No one liked him because he didn't share their religious perspectives. He had a very kind of social science informed approach to being Jewish. No one liked him, but he was a great fundraiser. So no one talked to him, no one was his friend, but they kept him around because he was really good at raising money for the school. Today, RRC trains way more rabbis than there are pulpits within Reconstructionist Judaism. Reconstructionist Judaism has about 100 congregations, and Chavarot, it's not very big, and they graduate like 10 students a year, which is way more than there are places to be. So RRC, in its earlier days, tended to be the backup school if you couldn't get into Jewish Theological Seminary, but you wanted to be a conservative rabbi. Because it was run by Mordechai Kaplan, they knew the students were going to be good. Um, Today, they're like halfway to being a pluralistic seminary. Um, Most of the RRC trained rabbis I know today do not work in Reconstructionist congregations. They have founded their own and done something that's a little bit like the church planting movement in evangelical Christianity, but they are not in Reconstructionist congregations. There just aren't enough places to work. And so Reconstructionist Judaism has always occupied this weird place in American Judaism where it's done a good job describing American Jews and has been influential well outside Reconstructionism as a movement. And the college, accordingly, functions that way too. And there are a lot of other rabbinical schools outside of the movements, even non-Orthodox ones. So we're not done talking about rabbinical schools ultimately. Questions before we move on?
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I was interested in your description of the relationship between the rabbinical schools and the congregation, because of course Mahar had uh, as a rabbi Nahama, who I believe was trained as a Reconstructionist rabbi.
Yep.
So he kind of went here, and then my cousin, who was trained as a conservative rabbi, is now a rabbi at Adat Shalom, the Reconstructionist synagogue. So it seems like they go back and forth a lot.
Yeah, there's a good amount of back and forth that can happen. The Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association will accept applications from rabbis from almost all of the accredited rabbinical programs, I think, as well as one or two others that aren't accredited but are considered to be rigorous enough. Um, the conservative movement and the reform movement will also accept applications from um, people who've been ordained through similarly accredited programs. So there's a lot of flow.
What do you mean applications? You mean to be part of the association so you're considered a rabbi in that movement?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Even if you
Um,
came from somewhere else.
yeah, so if you um, basically if you go to Hebrew Union College and you graduate, you automatically get in to the Central Conference of American Rabbis. You're automatically considered a Reform rabbi. If you went to Jewish Theological Seminary, you have to apply to be recognized as a member of the Reform Rabbinical Association, CCAR, because they want to figure out why you're doing that, essentially. Um, because the viewpoints of the movements are different. And so they want to explore a little bit why did you decide you wanted to do this? Or do you just think the job prospects are better, or do you really think that's kind of what's going on? And so they all have a little bit of an application process. The less rigorous they think your education was, the harder the application process becomes, basically. Um, Very few of them will take what are called private ordinations, which basically means anything that wasn't accredited. So if you went to, there's a yeshiva in Baltimore. If you went to the yeshiva in Baltimore and were ordained by a couple of the rabbis there, and then you went to apply to CCAR to be a Reform rabbi, they're not going to take the application. I mean, they'll just say you lack a major qualification. You don't have an ordination from an accredited rabbinical program. That basically was what's going on with that.
Got it.
So we talked a little bit about the Kahila, that kind of national or regional level organization, and couldn't really revive that. And the broad group of organizations we know today kind of stepped into the gap in the US, right? So that's our history for these other Jewish community organizations outside of the movements. There's a lot of organizations. This is not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. Jewish Federations of North America, if you hear people say JIFNA, they're talking about Jewish Federations of North America. um, Coordinates all the local Jewish federations. So Jewish Federation of Greater Washington is a member of JIFNA. Um, the Associated, which is the Jewish Federation in Baltimore, is a constituent member of JIFNA. The Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, boy, that's not a mouthful, is it? Um, what constitutes a major American Jewish organization is not 100% clear. It's kind of a legacy definition. Um, because that conference includes people like the president of the Miami-Dade Jewish Federation, but also the president of the Jewish Federations of North America, though one is a member of the other. AEPI and AEPhi, historically Jewish fraternities and sororities, their presidents are members of the Conference of Presidents. Um, the presidents of all the major, conservative reform, mainstream Orthodox, those presidents are members of the conference. Um, the president of the Workers' Circle used to be a member of the Conference of Presidents. Um, the organizations that are part of that conference are uniformly some kind of Zionist. Workers' Circle was not, and Worker Circle started objecting to um, policies of the Conference of Presidents and left rather than remain part of that organization. There's the American Jewish Committee, which most people call the AJC because they have to differentiate it from the American Jewish Congress. These are different organizations. They do slightly different things. The Jewish Council for Public Affairs, or JCPA, is sort of this national umbrella group for what locally are usually the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council. Um, so this is JCPA is sort of the national level clearinghouse for JCRCs. Hillel on university campuses, the American Joint Distribution Committee, which um, at various points has either helped retrieve Jews from um, persecution in Eastern European and Central European countries during the Holocaust, or has sent money to Israel, or has sent money to wherever. B'nai B'rith International, which you don't hear about them doing very much in the U.S. other than B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, but they're still around. Hadassah, right, spends most of its money in healthcare related things in Israel these days. JCC Association of North America, right, this kind of umbrella group for all the various JCCs. There's lots of local affiliates of all of these organizations. So you can kind of keep going down into this. Most of these organizations raise and spend money. Many of them also do direct programming, but not all of them do. Or if they do, it's not the biggest part of what they do. Right? Jewish Federations of North America doesn't do a lot of direct programming in communities, but does provide training and education for local organizations that do that work. Um, some of these do more lobbying than anything else, right? There's kind of a range. And a lot of them do multiple things at once. So the American Jewish Committee, the AJC, does a lot of study and work on anti-Semitism globally and does some lobbying on Capitol Hill for Israel and against Iran, right? They were against the Iran deal, as an example. American Jewish Congress is a little more to the left than the AJC, is a little bit more focused on American life. um, specifically called out white nationalist leaning or openly white nationalist congresspeople. Um, there's a they have stuff on their website from 2021. Marjorie Taylor Greene was named very directly, as well as some other folks were. Um, JIFNA, Jewish Federations of North America, supports local federations with training and programming, but it also funds and supports Israel-related programs, sends money to Israel itself, engages in advocacy in DC on things like security funds for synagogues and JCCs and local community agencies. So they do a really broad range of work. Most of these organizations aren't connected to movements directly, but they're not totally separate from that either. So most organizations have ties to movement organizations, right? These like Jewish Federation, very often the big ones. So Reform, Conservative, Modern Orthodox, and maybe Chabad. Um, Reconstructionism, Humanistic Judaism, Renewal, they're just too small very often for these big ones to bother with. Um, very few of them are not expressly Zionist. Some are a little less Zionist than others, but you're not going to find one that is not expressly Zionist in this big funder space. You just won't. And having brought that up, we're on the Israel-Palestine advocacy group. So before we move on to that, questions about all of the funders.
I noticed you didn't include Hyas in there. Are they?
Highest is coming up.
Oh, they're coming up. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So another category.
Yes. Yeah, and in some ways, HIAS is like the Joint Development Committee. The joint is like the Joint Distribution Committee. Yeah, like I said, there's Elaine named another organization. There are a lot of organizations that you could name.
Okay. So this organization actually funds Moshe House, which is now what's the Mem Global, right?
Yeah,
Moshe House, Mem
there's
Global.
there's a lot of organizations that you could name.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't really encounter Moishe House, interestingly. But the Joint Distribution Committee, which people have largely forgotten about, but without the I mean, Hannah Arendt's job when she got to the US was running the Joint Distribution Committee. I mean,
Hmm.
it was a hugely important job,
Yeah.
but there's you'll see just looking at the Israel-Palestine lined up organizations, these are the ones that are still around.
Yeah. Can I just ask one
Yeah,
question about the last slide thing, Jeremy?
yeah,
Just on Jewish federations. I'm
yes.
just trying to get a better sense
Mhm.
of the role that they play and, do they tend to lean right? I mean, and I think some smaller cities, I'm from St. Louis, and the Jewish Federation is a major player there. And lots of
Yeah.
people go to federation meetings and uh,
Yeah, so the local Jewish federations are the ones that tend to do the direct programming as opposed to JIFNA. Um,
okay.
Local federations, each of them tends to do a certain number of things that are the same no matter where you go. So they tend to be the major clearinghouse for local Jewish community fundraising for charitable causes.
Okay.
Um, they almost always have some kind of a social work arm. It's often but not always called the Jewish Social Services Agency, or JESA,
Okay.
JSSA.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them have a separate piece that also focuses on the needs of elders in the community. They often fund local Jewish education programming, but how they do it is different from place to place.
Hmm.
So for a while in Indianapolis, there was actually an agency called the Bureau for Jewish Education, and the Jewish Federation of Indianapolis used to help fund its operating costs. In DC, there used to be funds made available through the Federation to subsidize uh, Sunday school tuition.
Okay.
That has changed. The Jewish Federation of Howard County still does fund Sunday school tuition for families with
Okay.
financial needs.
And so
Um,
do they take political leanings at all, or are they left or right or
they tend to not be politically anywhere
hmm,
except on Israel questions and on anti-Semitism issues. And even with anti-Semitism issues, if there is a JCRC, a Jewish Community Relations Council, the Federation will usually simply fund the JCRC to some degree and step back.
hmm,
So the current vice president of the Jewish Federation for Greater Washington sends out an email. Gil Langer, I think it's Gil Langer, sends out an email every week, and it's usually very nice and cordial and apolitical, unless it's has something to do with Israel, and then it's a little bit more to the right than most Machar folks would be, at any rate.
got it.
Um, and then everything else is kind of everything else. They all have different priorities. Maybe they fund camp, maybe they don't. Maybe,
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Okay. Well, so it sounds like, a mechanism to get a lot of programming and services at the local levels,
yeah,
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 sounds good.
yeah. Which is why federations are kind of the other major center of Jewish life a lot of the time in local areas outside of synagogues.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. So these are the various Zionist or non-Zionist organizations, right? So Zionist, and I've gone roughly from right to left. So Zionist Organization of America, which didn't used to be the far right Zionist organization, but has become that over the last 35 years or so. Um, APAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the American Zionist Movement, which is um, some of its members are organizations we've already seen or will see later on. Um, they are really more sort of the American chunk of the World Zionist Organization. So they link up to what used to be called the World Zionist Congress, which Theodore Herzl founded, right? So that's the American Zionist movement. J Street, which calls itself liberal Zionist. New Jewish Narrative, which came about as a combination of Americans for Peace Now and Amenu. Um, New Jewish Narrative refers to itself as progressive Zionist. If Not Now does not refer to itself as Zionist at all or non-Zionist. And then Jewish Voice for Peace, which is expressly anti-Zionist. Um, you may have seen some news about a recent Jewish Federations of North America survey on Zionism, where basically a third of U.S. Jews don't call it, like a third of U.S. Jews don't even call themselves Zionist. Um, and many, many more of them say I'm pro-Israel than say that they're Zionist because they grew up thinking that being Zionist means making Aliyah. So older Jews often have reported in the survey that, well, Zionist means I'm going to move to Israel. I'm not moving to Israel. And younger Jews have often said, well, I care about the state of Israel, but I'm not a Zionist because they feel like that term has been so messed up and they don't want to fight over words. so they don't use the term Zionist. By contrast, the first five organizations listed here all say that they're Zionist, either very expressly, right? Zionist Organization of America says Zionist in the name. AIPAC says Zionist on their website. American Zionist Movement says Zionist on its website. J Street says liberal Zionism. New Jewish Narrative does not say Zionism in its mission statement, but when you look at their articles, they're all tagged with a thing that says progressive Zionism, so you kind of know what they're called. If Not Now says that it grapples with apartheid Zionism in the state of Israel as realities for Jews and for the harms that cause to others in all of that. Um, they are anti-occupation. That's the entire basis of If Not Now. Um, I don't know what they think happens if the occupation ends, but there's still like there's some vagueness about mission there. And then Jewish Voice for Peace is very clearly says we oppose Zionism, period. Um, they're interested in decolonization of the whole shebang, essentially. Um, so those are the Zionism connected or anti-Zionism connected organizations. World
Yeah.
Zionist, yeah,
If I can just clarify,
sure.
I know some people involved in JVP. They're also very committed to a one-state solution. They think that the state of Israel should be abolished and it should be a secular state, and anybody who wants to live there has citizenship. So, it's way at the other extreme then.
Yes. And they also kind of have this broader rhetoric about decolonizing the entire Middle East and
Mm.
what is the place of Israel in the decolonization of the Middle East and undoing brownwashing. And there's a real pulling in of some of these academic ideas about decolonization into all of the other stuff that they do. Um, it is it's surprisingly internationalist, actually, without being like communist internationalism
Hmm.
exactly. Although it's very left wing, so there's not some of that internationalism. Um, I mentioned the WZO a little bit, the World Zionist Organization. The World Zionist Organization has a legislative body within it that is composed of, it's basically a parliament. It's composed of Israeli and diaspora connected political parties. Um, this Congress convenes, there's voting. You can vote in the World Zionist Organization's election when it happens. You basically vote like Israelis do, you pick a party. Um, convenes, people are elected as members of the legislative body, and they vote on how the billions of dollars that the World Zionist Organization raises every year will be distributed to Israeli government and non-government organizations. And then the parties within the World Zionist Organization align on different points of the political spectrum and are often connected to specific religious movements. So there is a party within the World Zionist Organization called ARZA, ARZA, or ARTSA, which is really what they're trying to get at, land, that is Reform Judaism. It's the Reform Jewish Zionist Party. There is one called Aish, which is connected to Aish HaTorah, which is a particularly outreach-minded, ultra-Orthodox Jewish group. Um, so there's the American umbrella for that is the American Zionist Movement, AZM, and then there are all these parties within AZM that you vote for to be part of the World Zionist Organization's Congress. Um, it's a very funky setup, but it's trying to kind of duplicate the Israeli parliament for purposes of all of this international fundraising. on behalf of the state itself. So the WZO is actually really important. Voting for WZO is one of the ways you actually have as a regular Jew on the street to affect how money goes into the Israeli political system. It's very quirky. I don't know of a similar setup for any other diaspora group, but it's how it works. Okay, it is 8:01, and I said we'd be done in an hour, which was really a pipe dream. Um, so I think what we'll do is we'll cut here because there's still two or three other categories with a bunch of organizations in them. There's three more categories with a bunch of organizations in them. So we'll cut here, and I think what we'll do is next month, the first Thinking Tuesday in March is the Pirkei Avot continuation, and the second one will be the continuation of this because I want to respect everybody's time and make sure
I
that you're
appreciate that. Thank
able
you.
to do your other things.
Yes, thank you.
So we'll wrap it up here,
Okay.
and I'll see everyone at other things.
Well,
Yeah.